fun syllabus. Why?
Hello everybody and welcome to the Austrian Economics Forum at North Carolina State University. Today we're going to welcome Dr. Paul Cwik. Dr. Paul Cwik earned a Bachelor of Arts from Hillsdale College, a master's degree from Tulane University, and a PhD from Auburn. He is currently an Associate Scholar of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and an adjunct faculty member of the Foundation for Economic Education. Dr. Cwik is also the Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Mount Olive and is the Teaching Assistant Professor of the BB&T courses in Free Market Economics at North Carolina State University. Today he will be speaking on Austrian capital and interest theory. With that, we welcome Dr. Paul Cwik.
Taylor, you go ahead and close the doors. Okay, so capital and interest theory in Austrian economics is very much different than what you are used to in the neoclassical realm. So how does it differ? Why is this difference important? All of these sorts of things are the things that we want to touch on today. And so we have to go back to where we see capital and interest really take root. So we start with Böhm-Bawerk. So there's a picture of Böhm-Bawerk. So back in 1884, he published the first one of his eventual 3-volume set on capital and interest. Now, this was talked about a little bit last time, and I promised more details this time. And so, what did he talk about? Well, he says, suppose we have a machine. This machine will produce $10,000 worth of stuff each year for 10 years. So how much would you pay for that machine? Would you pay $100,000? And most people say, well, no. Why? Because that $10,000 a year for each year is spread out over time. So you don't just add them all up. In other words, we're asking the question, why is there a net return for the investor? Okay. So this is asking, why is there interest? Why do we discount things at a rate of interest? And so in his first volume, it's a history, it's a survey. What did other people say? And so Böhm-Bawerk then gives us these 5 categories of different theories throughout history. And he said the first one is, he refers to as the colorless theory. They refer to thinkers like Adam Smith, Turgot, and these guys just merely assert that, well, there just has to be surplus value. It doesn't really give us much detail, just an assertion. The second category, which we see Jean-Baptiste Say fall into, is productivity theory. And these assert that the application of the productive power of capital then produces this output of greater value, and so therefore we're going to have this bonus, which we call an interest. The next one is an abstinence theory, and this is simply stating that interest is derived from the postponement of present consumption. Okay. Then he has the remuneration theories, and these guys believe that the wage for labor contains some amount of surplus value, and that's what goes to interest. And then, of course, we have the Marxists and others who believe in the exploitation theory, and they hold that interest is an abridgment of the proper wages of workers. In other words, that they are stealing from the workers. So Böhm-Bawerk goes through each of these and he criticizes all of them. He said they're all wrong. And the ones that are even closest to him and what he thinks, he savages the hardest. Now, he doesn't tell us what he believes in the first volume. It's not until the second volume, which comes out in 1889, that he says the reason why there's interest is because of this thing called time preference. So what's time preference? It's the social rate at which people prefer present goods to future goods. Each individual simply prefers sooner to later, right? I put $100 in front of you, and I say, do you want the $100 now, or do you want to wait for a year? But it's not just dollars, right? I could give you keys to a new car, right? Do you want the car now, or do you want the car a year from now? And then notice that we have this Latin phrase, ceteris paribus, and that means what? That means holding everything else constant. Now, why did we put that little caveat there? Well, we put that little caveat there because you're going to have somebody who says, well, I'm not hungry for breakfast right now. I'm going to be hungry for breakfast later, right? So I don't want breakfast now, I want breakfast later, so I prefer later to sooner. Well, no, you're not holding your ceteris paribus assumption, which is what? You're hungrier later. Things have changed. Some people will say, oh, I don't want ice in the winter, I want ice in the summer, so I'm willing to wait, right? Therefore, I prefer later to sooner. No, again, violating the ceteris paribus assumption. What's changed? The seasons have changed. Okay, so here's von Bauer. This is his quote. He says, present goods have in general greater subjective value than future goods of equal quantity and quality. And since results derived from ascribing the subjective value determine objective exchange value, present goods have in general greater exchange value and a greater price than future goods of the same kind and quality. Now, for von Bauer, that is a clear statement. That's about as clear as he gets. It's like, wow, all right. So, what are the elements that von Bauer then says comprise the interest rates? Well, here they are. The first one is that present wants are more intense than future wants, right? I can use that $100 now, and that intensity is felt more deeply now than maybe, a week from now or something. Number two, people might underestimate their future wants relative to their present wants because they lack imagination or willpower or are uncertain about their lifespan. So I'm going to live it up now because I don't know what tomorrow holds. Or you want your candy now, son, or do you want it later? I can't wait for later. I want it now, right? So he lacks willpower. And then number three, this is where we have the big dispute. Present goods have a technical superiority over future goods. Roundaboutness is productive. We'll talk about roundaboutness in a little bit. But this is where the debate comes in. Because what is he arguing? He is arguing that productivity plays a role in interest rate formation. Okay. So I have von Bauer's lapse. So volume 1, 1884, von Bauer savages, destroys the productivity theory of interest. Volume 2, he presents productivity as a big component of the formation of interest rates. Oh, wait, what? In 1895, then, he clarifies his position. He shifts it back towards preference theory, but he never completely gets rid of this productivity thing. So Lord Robbins, to quote Robbins was a historian of economic thought, and he puts it this way, he says, some people have thought, and in my judgment not entirely without justification, that von Bauer was really letting productivity in by the back door, having, so to speak, with oaths and with curses turned away productivity theory out the front door. He denounced it in a terrific passage in the first volume of Capital and Interest, page after page after page, denouncing all productivity theories. Right. So there's von Bauer. So is it that, after discarding the productivity theory of interest in the first volume, that he allows it to resurface in his own positive theory? Well, yes. Yes, he does. In Pure Theory of Capital, written by Hayek, he says, yeah, it looks like it. Von Bauer characterized time preference as actually a subordinate determinant for the formation of interest rates, at least in the short run. In other words, productivity played a larger role in von Bauer's mind. So the issue's open to debate. So, to understand von Bauer's interest rate theory, we need to talk more about productivity and capital theory. So, where do we start? Well, we start, hold on here. Looks like a page did not come out. Oh, wait, hold on. Here's my page. Okay, so unlike modern neoclassical theory then, Austrians view capital as heterogeneous. Okay? What does that mean? Well, we're building on Menger. We talked about Menger last time. Menger made this distinction between the different stages of production. You start with the tree. You chop the tree down. The tree then gets sent to the sawmill. You turn the tree into boards. And then the boards go to the manufacturer. The manufacturer turns it into a pencil, and it goes to a wholesaler, and then a retailer, and eventually you buy it, right? It goes through these different steps or stages of production. The earlier stages of production, Menger called the higher order goods. The later stages of production, he called the lower order goods. Now, Böhm-Bawerk argued that there's a definite time element and a structure to the production process. In other words, you can't go changing the order of things. You can't chop down the tree and then turn it into a pencil and then chop it into boards, right? And then send it to the retailer and then to the wholesaler. Right? It doesn't make any sense, right? It has to go in a particular sequence. So he enters into this debate with John Bates Clark, actually twice. And it's over capital theory and interest rate theory. It's the same argument that he does a couple of times. And then again in the 1930s, the same debate is resurrected between Hayek, who is an Austrian economist, and Frank Knight, who is the follower of John Bates Clark. And again, it's over almost exactly the same points. It's eerie how it all just repeats itself. So then, how does it all fit together? All right. How does Austrian capital theory work? So we start at the beginning. Where do we start? We start with Robinson Crusoe. And we're all really familiar with Robinson. No, nobody's familiar with Robinson. I once had a student say, I remember hearing about it in the theme song to Gilligan's Island. Like, okay, yes, it's in the outro of, okay. Fine. Imagine Tom Hanks in Castaway, right? He's all alone. Remember the movie? Wilson! Right? Okay. Now, he's hungry. Okay? He's got lots of needs, lots of wants, lots of desires, right? He's cold, he's wet, but let's say of all the things that he is, the most urgent want of his is hunger, right? He wants to deal with his hunger. So what does he need? What are the original factors of production? What are the three components? Well, the first one are the natural resources, right? You need the food. Without the food, nothing, okay? Then you need the labor, right? Food just doesn't hop into your mouth, right? We're not Marxists here. We don't just think, oh, look at that, that fried duck or pheasant, just roasted pheasant fly right in my mouth. In Marx, you see it's a post-scarcity world. He said that, right? That you could just stand there and it would fly into your mouth. What's the third component that we need? Well, the third component is time, right? See, I like that picture because the kid's like wearing a watch. Look at that.
It's
it
got
takes
it all
time.
right there.
That is awesome.
Food, labor, and time.
I love it. Okay. Now, what if he needs 10 units of food to survive? And if he's only able to acquire 8 units a day, he's going to have a miserable but short existence. If he is able to acquire 10 units a day, he's going to have a miserable existence. He's going to be living at a subsistence level. But what if he's able to acquire more? What if he's able to acquire 15 units of food a day? Well, now he has a choice. He can get to 10 and then just take the rest of the day off. What's he doing? He's consuming leisure. Or he can work the whole day, work the whole second day, and then take the third day off. Again, consuming leisure. Or, instead of taking the third day off, he could, if he wants, use that savings to feed himself while he works on a stick. Capital good. Why would he want the stick? Because the stick will enable him to knock the fruit down from the trees, that it can gather it a little bit faster. Or maybe he can make the stick into a spear and he can go spear fishing. So what do we see from this very simple example of Tom Hanks on an island? Well, what we see is that it takes savings to generate capital. And that capital then does one of two things or both. The first is that it increases your productivity. I can have more fruit. Or it allows me access to a consumer good that I didn't have access to before, like the fish when I'm spearfishing it. Okay? So savings is necessary for capital formation. It doesn't come about any other way. So then what are the different categories of capital? Well, we have capital equipment, right? Here's a berry picker, right? I like that one. And we also have intermediate capital goods, goods in process. So after we pick the berries, what do? Well, we have to take these to the processor, right? And turn it into blueberry jam or whatever it is. Or just package it up. And then the third category of capital is financial capital. And I said last time I'd show you the picture of money with Bombawork on it. There it is. It's from Austria. Nice. Pretty impressed. I can tell. You're like, wow, I'm so impressed.
Bombawork.
Okay. So how did then Bombawork then think of this structure of production? Well, he thinks of it as a series of concentric circles. Okay. Now when I reformatted this to the new PowerPoint presentation, apparently the words got pretty small. But the center one, I'm sorry, you start from the outside one. These are goods that will become consumer goods within the next year. And then deeper in here is the consumer goods that will become consumer goods, or the goods that will become consumer goods in 2 years. And then this one, the center one, is consumer goods that will be, are goods that will become consumer goods in 3 years. So these are the goods in process, okay? And the ring that you don't see around it is where we have the consumption, okay? So this is an odd sort of way of formulating it, but he's thinking of like a tree, right? It's growing out and such. So for Bombawork, this is a more roundabout economy, right? Look at that's growth where you're making more rings. That's pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now when we talk about roundaboutness, right? When we talk about roundaboutness, we're talking about less direct. What's a direct form? It's when Tom Hanks eats the berries. A less direct is when I use a capital tool, right? I knock the berries from the tree, I then pick them up, and then I eat them. There's an extra step there, isn't there? Why in the world am I making extra steps? Is it because I just enjoy making things more complex? No. I'm making extra steps because it increases my productivity, or it gives me access to things that I have not had access to before. And so, as I make it more roundabout or less direct, or another way that we call it is complexity. As I make it more complex, I do so because it increases my welfare. It makes me better off, either in terms of quantity or quality or just a wholesale change. But this really isn't being clear. It's not helping me figure out this economy. So, Hayek in the 1930s, he redraws the structure of production. And so he presents it like this. So we've got our different stages. He puts time on the vertical axis, value over here, and he says, okay, we've got 4 stages here. Now sometimes we call this the Hayekian triangle, and it kind of looks a little bit like a triangle. But 4 stages? Are there only 4 stages in the economy? No, there's many more than that, right? So we can put more in there. We're just using this as an example to illustrate the point. And so time over here, as we move through time, we're not measuring time. It's not like 4 days or 3 hours or a year or a month. We're simply saying this comes before this, which comes before this, which comes before this. It's a sequence. It's not trying to measure any unit of time. Okay? Now, Garrison, he reformulates this, makes it a little bit clearer for us. So he puts time on the horizontal axis, right? So we're moving through time. And as we go from stage to stage to stage, we're adding value. And thus the amount of value grows. And then ultimately at the end of the structured production, we see that we have output for consumer goods. Okay? Now, 4 stages, that is just an example. We can add more stages to this. In fact, we do. And so what we end up having is our structure production. We have intermediate goods moving through. So I chop down the tree. The tree then goes to the manufacturer, turns it into boards and pencils, goes to the wholesaler, goes to the retailer. And so the intermediate goods are moving through the structured production, and they're being combined with the original factors of production. At each stage, there's capital equipment that is embedded in this, and we're adding new resources of labor, natural resources to each stage. We see that inside each stage of production, we've got capital equipment, machines and tools that are embedded there. And then we have markets between each and every one of these stages. So up here at the very top, you have the consumers who are making a purchase. And they're buying from the retailer. The retailer then is buying from the wholesaler. The retailer's demand curve for wholesale goods is based upon the demand curve from the consumers. And the wholesaler then buys from the manufacturer. The wholesaler's demand curve is based upon the retailers, which is based upon the consumers. The manufacturer then buys from the raw materials guys, and their demand curve is imputed back to or from the consumers. And so what we see here then is that linkage all the way through. At the same time, owners of the resources have a supply curve. Now, I don't directly value producer goods. If I got home today, or if you got home today, and you saw a big block of lead, 2 tons of lead sitting on your front porch, you wouldn't go, yay, woo, got me some lead. No.
Some of us would.
Most, no, you would not. All right? Why? Because we don't directly value it. Or suppose you got like a half-finished car, right? Like, wow, I got a fender, nice, right? No, we don't directly value these things unless we own it, right? So, I don't directly value iron ore, but what if I own the iron ore mine? Well, because it's mine, yeah, I can value it. And so when we sell to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer then sells to the wholesaler, the manufacturer's supply curve is based upon the raw material guy's supply curve. And so the supply curves are imputed forward through the structured production. The demand curves are imputed backwards through the structured production, and they're both based on subjective valuations. Now, I've been saying that there's more than just 4 steps, 4 stages, and so when we aggregate them, there's uncountably many, and so we turn it into a smooth triangle. Does it have to be a nice smooth triangle? No, this is just an illustration of the concept. In fact, what we end up seeing is that there's no telling where a particular firm would be, right? You don't have you go to a company, and at the gate, right, there's a little picture of the structured production with a big red dot that says you are here, right? We don't see that. And then we have recursive loops and dual purpose items, and that further complicates the problem, right? So if I buy a computer, is that a consumer good or a producer good?
Yes.
If I use it for work, it's a producer good. If I'm playing video games on it, it's a consumer good. I mine iron ore, I take that iron ore, I turn it into steel, I take that steel and I turn it into a machine that digs out iron ore, right? That's a recursive loop, right? So there's lots of complexities to this, right? We're not ignoring them. What we're trying to do is just simplify the concept so that we can move forward. Okay, so roundaboutness is sometimes called lengthening the structure of production or making it more complex. So this idea is an essential concept in Austrian capital theory. So Baumgartner argues that in order to increase production, the capital structure has to become more roundabout or complex. Now, why in the world would an entrepreneur do this? Why would they want to make it more complex? Well, obviously, the purpose of lengthening the production process is to increase profits, right? That's why we do it. We want more profits. Now, this could manifest in a faster assembly line, higher quality products, more diverse products, right? Any number of reasons, but the reason is more profits. And we need to recognize that adding length for its own sake, that's counterproductive. You don't just go making things more complex than they have to be, right? It's the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple. Silly or stupid, either way. So what matters then is that the overall structure of production is efficient when it's in balance. Right? We don't want too much complexity and just for complexity's sake. But the complexity then does what? It allows us to produce more. So, auto manufacturers. Back in the day, back in the 50s, they would use drafting tables. Right? Okay, we want to change the flange on this one part. We want to move it just a couple of millimeters. What does that mean? Well, that means I get my eraser and I start erasing on this mylar, and then on the other mylar that does the surface, and then the other mylar that does the surface of the tool, and then the other opposite side of the tool. And so I end up changing 12 different sheets of paper or mylar. Well, that's incredibly complex. But today they use computers, right? You move it, you hit a sync button, it goes, right? And it recalculates that line for all of the different things, all the tools and the parts itself, and all the adjoining parts. It's amazing stuff. But that's adding length, isn't it? We make this, we do it this way, we do this because it's making it much faster. But is it lengthening the structure of production? It's faster, right? Yes, it is lengthening the structure of production because the time component isn't measuring minutes or hours or days. It's measuring steps in a sequence, right? So, yes, who made the computers? Who made the software? What are all the steps in between? All these things are adding complexity. And that added complexity means it's less direct. It's more roundabout. Does that make sense? You guys see that? So we're lengthening the structure of production, even though it goes faster, right? But where did the computer come from? Well, that's a step, right? And all the different stages of making the computer. And what about the software? That's another step. And all those different stages and all those things need to be integrated together. So then how do we then grow? Well, I like to present what I call the magic formula for economic growth. Now, is it truly magic? No, it's not magic. It's sort of like magic, but it's not actually magic. Now, what I like to do is I like to start at the end and work my way to the beginning. So I say, what's the goal of an economy? And some people will say jobs, and I say, no, jobs are easy. Stalin could make jobs. Mao could make jobs. Jobs are easy. Not the goal. Some people would say the economy is not an actual thing, and it's just a composite of a whole bunch of different people, so it truly can't have a goal. A goal. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, very good. Touche to you. But if we were going to ascribe to an economy a goal, we could say it's what? Higher living standards. Now, how do we get higher living standards? Well, here's the technical phrase. We need more stuff. And when I say more stuff, I don't just mean quantity. I'm talking quality and diversity of things. Okay. Where does that come from? Well, higher productivity. We need to work harder, make more stuff, right? So that means I need to create more per unit time or with per unit resource. Well, how do I do that? Well, I need better tools, better machines, better equipment. And that does have a technical phrase. It's called capital accumulation. Where does capital come from? Investment. And where does investment come from? Savings. So what do we have here? We have savings leads to investment, which leads to capital accumulation, higher productivity, more stuff, and then higher living standards. Now, for those of you who've read some economic history, you'll recognize this as Say's law. from Jean-Baptiste Say way back in the early 1800s. And what did Jean-Baptiste say? Well, he had a big, thick treatise on political economy. And so it's really disingenuous to take all of what he says and boil it down into one law. But we can do that. And in fact, it's even more disingenuous to take that one law and boil it down into one sentence. But we're going to do that too. Right? And so, what can we say is Say's law? Well, we produce in order to consume. We produce in order to consume. So I'm going to go off the reservation for a moment, just because I can. Produce in order to consume. So this is Say. Now, years ago, John Maynard Keynes wanted to put his theory forward. And in order to in order to put his theory forward, he had to destroy everyone else before him. And so what he did was he rephrased Say's law. He says, supply creates its own demand. Now, notice how these two things kind of look parallel, right? Produce in order to consume, supply creates its own demand, right? We've got produce and supply, we've got consume and demand, right? Looks pretty good. And then he does what? Then he turns it. And he says, supply creates its own demand. That's Say's law. So ignore this part up here. Supply creates its own demand. Do you mean if I supply balloons made out of lead, little kids are going to go, I want that, I'm going to buy that. Anything you supply, people are just going to buy it. Supply creates its own demand? No, that's ridiculous. And so we reject Say's law. Now, did he actually reject Say's law? No. What did he do? He redefined the terms and then threw it away. If you're interested in history of economic thought, that's a mystery. Not because Keynes did that. That's very straightforward, very simple. Why did he do that? Because he wanted to take all his predecessors out so they could replace his theory, right? Take their theories and replace them with his. That's very straightforward. But here's the big question. Why is it that all these other economists who knew better, why did they go along with this? I don't know. I don't know. So, anyway, Say's law. We produce in order to consume. What's at the end? Why? Consumption is at the end, right? Where do we start? We have to first produce something before we can take from the general output of society. I have to serve others before I can consume, right? And so here's the magic formula. Where's consumption here in the magic formula? It's the end, right? That's their goal, is consumption. But how do we do that? We need to have savings. Now, what is savings? Savings is deferred consumption. So is that savings when I take that money and I put it in the bank? Yes. Is it savings when a company makes a profit and retains that money, right? It's called retained earnings, and they reinvest it back into the company? Yes, that's also savings. What if I take that money and put it in a shoebox? Does that also have the same effect? Yes, it's much more complex to work through all the little details, but yes, that's also savings. Oh. So it's deferred consumption. Okay, so let's look at this model here, right? So here's our structured production up here at the top. We have consumer goods and our structured production. And over here we have our market for early stage goods and a market for late stage goods. Now, we want to make the structured production more roundabout. So how do we do that? We first need to increase savings. What is that? Deferred consumption. When we defer consumption, what happens to C up here at the top? It goes down. What's the impact then in these other markets for our early stage and our late stage markets? right? Here, I'll do it again. See, we got, woo, cool. We see an increase in demand for the early stage goods. Why? Because look at how we're adding roundaboutness there. You see how it's increasing over here to the left? See up here where it says time? That's an increase in demand for those goods. But for the late stage goods, like consumer goods and such, there's a decrease in demand. Do you see the moment we add a structured production, how very different our result is from the Keynesians? What does the Keynesian say? A decrease in consumption leads to recession.
Right.
But it isn't saying that. We see that there's a relative market effect over here, and we have another market effect over here, but it's certainly not universal. It's not the same effect. So the factor markets supply each of these different stages, and each of these different stages are affected differently. So the ones that are way out here, these are brand new stages. These are going to see a decrease. What do the other schools say about this? Nothing. They tend to ignore it. Remember, for them, what they do is they're aggregating capital. They're aggregating production. They don't make this distinction at all. So does roundaboutness change the interest rate, right? This is the question that we were asking before. Well, first thing we need to do is make this distinction between rents and interest. Okay. What's a rent? Well, every factor production earns a return. That's what we call rent. Now, it's a terrible term, right? Because you think rent, you think, I gotta pay the rent for my apartment. No, we're just talking about the rate of return on factors of production. So the return, right, the rent, is the price that has to be paid to a factor of production, which equals its marginal product. So every factor then earns a rent or return that is equal to its marginal product in equilibrium. So every factor of production then gets this. So if I get a worker, what do I pay them, right? Marginal product of labor. I get capital, right? It depends on its marginal productivity. So the machine then, at the beginning of the example, what is this $10,000 a year? That's its rent, right? Or its rate of return. So the marginal productivity then explains the height of the factor's rental price. Why is it $10,000? Why isn't it $8,000? The productivity then explains that number. But it doesn't explain why the rent should be discounted across time. You see the difference? One is 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, right? And then we say, okay, we're going to discount those future values to the present value. One is asking, why is it 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, not 8,000, 8,000, 8,000? That's productivity. More productivity makes it 10,000, 10,000, or 12,000, 12,000, right? Interest says that future value will be discounted. So it doesn't explain this discount. The explanation then lies with time preference, right? That's that idea that people prefer sooner to later. So Rothbard then answers this. He says, productivity is not an influence to interest rates. And I'm just going to quote him. He says, roundaboutness is an important aspect of the productivity of capital goods. However, while this productivity may increase the rents to be derived from capital goods, it cannot account for an increase in the rate of interest return. That is, the ratio between the annual rents derived from these capital goods and their present price. That ratio, interest, is strictly determined by time preference. So let's contrast this with the neoclassicals. What do they say? Well, we need to go back to John Bates Clark. John Bates Clark and Böhm-Bawerk, they have a debate. It starts in 1893 when Clark writes his essay, The Genesis of Capital. What's its beginning? So, it looks like this. Clark envisions capital flows into a pool of water. So you have your flow of new investment or a stock of capital, and you have your depreciation or depletion. Now, when I think of a pool, I tend to think of something like this. Right? Nice, calm, relaxing sort of pool. Now, we're stuck with this. So, the pool is this perpetual stock of resources. And while we have stream flowing in and flowing out, if those two rates match, then this height, the stock of capital, it doesn't change. Right? So as long as the inflow and the outflow stays the same, the height of the water doesn't change. So the level of the pool has to be maintained by the market. But the distinction is, this is important, that there is no time needed for the production of goods. Because all that matters is the height of the water. Thus Clark argued that capital could simply be viewed as a homogeneous pool of K. A big pool of K. So Clark claimed that time was needed to get a factory up and running. But once it was up and running, there's no more waiting required. You didn't have to wait anymore. As long as there's continuous inputs, we get continuous outputs. And as long as that, it's like, I need some shoes. Well, just go to the store. They're there. They're there right now. Done. I don't have to wait. What's this waiting thing? There's no waiting. They're there. Time is irrelevant. So as long as we stick inputs in, we're going to get outputs out simultaneously. There's no time. There's no need for time. So we don't have to factor time into our theory. This is called synchronicity. Okay? This is what Clark calls synchronicity. Capital, either as a homogeneous blob or pool of K, could be shaped or molded into anything. In fact, he presents an example where you take a whaling ship and you transform it into a shoe factory. Right? Here's a whaling ship. Here's a shoe factory. Right? Even like Jamaica Plains, Massachusetts shoe factory right there. Yeah. Yay. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, as the whaling ship is used, two things occur. The first is that the whaling ship earns returns, and those returns are used to fund the building of the shoe factory. And secondly, the ship is wearing out, it's depreciating. And so at the end of the process, the capital is fully transferred and transformed into the shoe factory. Oh. See, the capital is just this homogeneous blob. I can change anything into anything else. So Clark's origin of interest rates then are dependent upon his view of capital. So it should come as no surprise that he denies the need for time. If you don't need time in capital, why in the heck would you need time in interest? Right? You don't. So he says abstinence then originates new capital. It diverts income in money from the expenditure that would secure goods for consumption to that which secures instruments of production. Once the capital is in place, though, no more waiting would have to occur. As a result, time could no longer be used as the basis of interest. So Clark then adopts a productivity theory of interest. And he says this: the power of capital to create product is the basis of interest. So what does Bombaverick have to say to this? Now I like Bombaverick because he doesn't pull his punches. He says that Clark's analysis of changing capital goods into a permanent capital fund is based entirely upon analogies. Okay? And he calls them out on this. Now, it's a little bit of a long quote, but it's a good one. There seems to dwell in the human heart an enervating proneness for playing the poet in the matters of science, and for placing by the side of the common natural things and forces with which we have to do in the world of prose visionary doubles in the form of all sorts of mystical beings and powers, to which a semblance of reality is imparted by means of an elegant abstraction. I hold this practice to be fraught with the greatest danger to science. If one departs from the bare truths of nature by only a hair's breadth, Scientific accuracy of thought is irretrievably lost. The sway of truth gives place to that of words and sounding phrases. Right? Now, if you're going to take someone down, that's an awesome way to take someone down. That's great. A hair's breadth. Greatest of dangers, I love it. So, irretrievably lost. Yeah, well, it wasn't that wrong. All right. So what is the modern neoclassical concept of capital? Now, Frank Knight learned from John Bates Clark, who then taught Milton Friedman. And Frank Knight then came up with this. There we go. So economists freeze K, right? It's a homogeneous blob and we hold it constant. We only let L change. And then we come up with the 3 Knightian stages of production, right? So here's our single input, one input L. We're only varying it in terms of quantity. Quality is frozen, right? And where's capital? There's no capital, right? And so where do we operate? Knightian stage 2, see? Done, easy. That's how we look at production in the mainstream. Even when economists allow K to vary, right, like in the solo growth models, or even the real business cycle theory to some extent, it only is allowed to do so within these very narrow parameters. Right? So they're afraid to even look at changing capital into a homogeneous, or from a homogeneous blob to a heterogeneous structure. So what's the modern neoclassical concept of interest? We're going to set the Keynesians aside because they're just wrong. So the modern approach uses the loanable funds market. So it looks like this. Okay, it's a little small. But the supply curve is the savers, the demand curve are the borrowers, and we have people who are natural savers down here. The people who love to spend are these guys up here. Then we have borrowers with options down here, and the people who need dollars for the investment now are up there. Okay? So the supply side is portrayed as the subjective time preference component, right? So who are the natural savers, who are the natural spenders, okay? Then we have the demand side, which is the objective productivity side. So this is for these important investments, and then these are for the ones with options. In order for productivity theories to hold, we have to at least be able to recognize how capital goods relate as complements or substitutes. Because that's kind of important, isn't it? If I increase my capital, am I envisioning it as a complement or as a substitute? Well, if it's a homogeneous blob, what am I thinking of all capitals being? Substitutes. All of it, 100% substitute. Okay, well, in the neoclassical framework, capital is homogeneous and perfectly substitutable. One blob of Play-Doh is the same as any other blob of Play-Doh. And it's all gray, it's all the same color gray. But this assumption really doesn't hold in the real world, does it? Suppose you're a baker and you've got a delivery truck. Okay? See? Hey! Nice guy and everything. It's a very small truck, you see. I mean, look at that. He's got his hand on the steering wheel and he's got half his body out the other side. He's either freakishly large or anyway. Suppose you get a second delivery truck. Is that second delivery truck a substitute or a complement to the first? Well, hold on. It's definitely a substitute, right? Because it's exactly identical to the first, right? See? Look, they're the same. They can do exactly the same jobs, right? Substitutes. No question about it. However, it can also complement the first if you put it on a different delivery route, right? Oh. So now they work together. Oh. So even if I have two exactly identical things, they're complements. Sometimes. Unless one gets a flat tire. Then they're substitutes. I put them on two different routes, they're complements. I can't just look at it and go, ha, that's a substitute. Ah, that's a complement. It's how we use it. capital complementarity and substitutability. If we examine the real world, what do we see? We see that most capitals arrange in complementary patterns. I chop down the tree. I take it to the sawmill. I transform it into boards. The boards then get shipped to the manufacturer. Manufacturer turns it into a pencil, goes to a wholesaler, goes to a retailer, right? What is this? What is this? It's true. Some capital is substitutable, but the structure of production shows the degree of complementarity. In other words, if all capital was just this blob, it's all substitutable, then the structure of production would be wholly irrelevant. In fact, that's exactly what the neoclassicals do. They ignore structure of production. It is completely irrelevant. They don't look at it. They don't use it. So why is the structure of production so important? Well, these insights that can't be uncovered otherwise. Right? We had just a little teeny taste. When I said, suppose that for some reason people save more and we consume less. Should we all freak out?
Yes.
If you're Keynesian, you do. Oh no, thrift, can't have that. Keynesian looks at decreasing consumption panics. And Austrian says if we reduce present consumption for the production of future consumption, that's great. Right? Because if we defer consumption, we save, we build up that magic formula, we have future growth. We don't get people lose their jobs, but within in other sectors, jobs are growing. We transfer jobs. It's not a net loss. Structured production, right, it becomes more roundabout when we increase current consumption. And then what we see then is that this capital-based approach then to macroeconomics leads to the Austrian theory of the business cycle. Okay, which is not something we're going to get into today, because that's a whole other can of bees. You're like, can of bees? Yeah, as opposed to a can of worms, right? Because you open up a can of worms and just sort of sits there and worms are good, right? That's not scary, right? Can of bees, that's something you got to worry about, right? Mm-hmm. Can of bees. All right. Does that make sense? Kind of, sort of? Okay. There's my email address there. But let's talk. Let's talk about this. Let's get some questions and such. So, is this stuff that you guys have seen before? Probably not. Is it?
A little bit.
Yeah, but then you're crazy unique. So, okay, but this isn't something that you see in any of your normal classes, is it? In micro class, you ever? No. In macro class, maybe you might touch on it a little bit when you get to like real business cycle theory, where you have 2 stages of production, 2 steps. A little bit in solo growth model, he at least talks about capital, but still, these are very narrow strictures. You see how that when we relax that assumption of a homogeneous blob of capital, all of a sudden this notion of structure, the different sectors of the economy open up. And that changes how we think about an economy, right? Where are most of the jobs? Are the jobs at the consumer level? Right? What sort of job is at the consumer level? That's where you say, you want fries with that? Right? That's jobs at the consumer level. Or in the South, you want your tie to be sway or unsway, right? That's consumer level. Most people's jobs aren't there. They're higher up in the structure of production. They're earlier. All these engineers, right? All of the people who are doing research and development, all of our computer programmers, all of these guys are much further up in the structure of production. And then what do we see? So we see that those R&D early stage jobs are the ones that are in the United States. We then see the middle stage jobs of manufacturing have moved overseas to other countries. But then we see that the later stage jobs, again, like the retail and the consumer service side, are back here in the United States. So you can't even just look at segments, right? So the structured production then, now we got to integrate that across countries. That opens up all these other questions, all these other dynamics that economists don't even ask, because they don't have that same sort of concept of the rest of the world, or of capital, right? Okay, so what do you think? Questions? You have questions? You're thinking, you're stuck. Yes. Is that 2 questions, or are you flashing gang signs?
Okay, I'm throwing some signs. When we look at modern technologies that, initially I was thinking of like the 3D printers, but that's really not new. It's just a more, consumer level application of CNC technology, which has been, prevalent in manufacturing for a couple of decades now, and it's always getting more and more. Computer numerically controlled machines that kind of bring us closer to that, just print the part, design the part, print the part, rather than, okay, we're going to build a tool that's going to form the part out of something, or maybe 2 intermediate steps or whichever. So kind of bridging what you were talking about, where it's a blob of capital, and those kinds of machines kind of bring that closer to that concept, but there's still, do you know what I mean? That, well, if you're manufacturing something, that kind of capital is a lot more flexible, right?
But they have limited applications right now. Maybe in the future you'll have much more application of specialized part manufacturers. But even if you're saying, look, I'm taking a homogeneous blob and I'm converting it into a part, you're still building a complex machine, right? And so the part that you're manufacturing, right? I'm not saying that there isn't any amount of homogeneity, right? Because even with wood, right? I'm chopping down the tree. Well, it's homogeneous wood, right? Because a board is a board is a board, right? It doesn't matter if I got the tree from here or over there or over there. But that's really of secondary importance. It's how do we integrate these complementary stages together, right? And we use capital machines, tools, and equipment, and they might produce a part, and that part might have formed from a blob, but then it becomes very specific. Now, there was an article, I'm trying to remember when this came out, it was I think it was in the late 70s, where he's talking about putty clay, and where you have putty and it's malleable, and then you form it into something that dries, and now it's clay, it's set, right? And so you have your fund of capital that you invest, and then it sets as a clay in the form of a capital good, like a capital machine, that will then stamp out parts, right? So it starts as this fungible money, and then it gets transferred into a machine. We're not denying any of that, but the thing is that once it's concretized as that machine, what then can I do with it other than its function, right? And then the question is, how do I integrate that machine with other things? And if I don't have an entrepreneur who is able to integrate that machine and up and down the structured production, then he goes out of business and that machine gets thrown away. But what if that guy gets fooled into making machines that are incompatible with other things up and downstream? And there's a whole sector that then goes through this. Or what if it's systemic, right? The whole system has people building capital goods that are not congruent with things up and downstream. What do we get? We get a temporary boom, followed by a bust. Oh, that's the seeds of the business cycle theory. Right? So it's about how you integrate it together. And this is one of the things that Austrians are very good at talking about, because we point to things like I-pencil. Right? That's that spontaneous order notion of how do we build this pencil? How do you integrate all of these steps without a central planner? How do we do any of this, right? And so you have to have entrepreneurs who read market signals like prices, They're looking at inventory levels. They're looking at temporary shortages and surpluses. They're using a feedback loop called the profit and loss mechanism, and that's how they integrate themselves into the larger whole, into this thing that we call spontaneous order. It's a very difficult thing to do, this thing called an economy. Right. Okay, so this is very different, I get that, and so you guys are all sort of overwhelmed. It's okay. What other questions do you have? What are you guys working on that you say, oh, well, that changes this, you know, that might help.
I think it's a very good idea to lending the produce to earn to get more profits. But I have a question about that. Is it really mean that if you lengthen the product and the production, and if you actually earn the profits, because if the more product stage, it means that you have you can see more risk. I mean, if you can't buy the materials from the others in time, maybe you can make some troubles for your production. So I think for individually, and maybe I think lengthen the production is not increased, but for the whole industrial, lengthen the production will increase profits.
Well, it reminds me of a story that I've heard about Apple. When Apple was going to first come out with their iPhone, they needed the glass to work. Right, that's kind of important, right? Do you remember the what they had before iPhones? Those iPods, right? The iPod. It had a little wheel at the top. It almost kind of looked like this. It had a wheel up here, and it had a screen. And what they were originally designing the iPhone to have was a wheel, a screen, and then a series of numbers. It looked awful. And Steve Jobs trashed it. He said no. And so they said, okay, we want it to be cool, right? And so they were looking for glass that would do this. And they had to do a lot of research to figure out where it was. And they discovered that there was a type of glass that had the conductivity and the strength and the flexibility and all that sort of stuff that they wanted. The only problem was that Dow Chemical owned the patent, and they hadn't built it since the 1950s. There was no demand for it. So it was out of production, it was mothballed, it was sitting on someone's shelf, here's the formula. And so Apple says, look, guys, we need this sort of glass. And they're like, how do we know that this will integrate into the rest of the structure? Production. I'm sure that's exactly how they said it too, being good Austrian economists that they were. How do we integrate this in throughout the rest of the structure? There's a risk to it, right? There's always entrepreneurial risk in any of these things. And so obviously they took the gamble, and it turned out to be very successful, and now it's a great story for people like us. But whenever you are looking at trying to enhance or make more complex the structure of production, we're not doing it because we're like, hey, I want to make it more complex. You're doing it because you're seeing a profit opportunity. That profit opportunity says, I can re-coordinate the economy better than where it is, the way it's coordinated right now. So I can integrate these guys with these guys better than what they're currently able to do with each other. I can fill that service. And by doing that, for me stepping into that gap, that makes it more complex. Suppose you're a large company and you're saying, we're manufacturing these clickers here, and we're great at that, but all these HR laws, I don't know how to do all this HR stuff. I mean, it's just crazy complex. And with all these new rules and regulations, what I'm going to do is I'm going to outsource my HR department. Right? If I step in and I say to that company of yours, I say, hey, let me do your HR for you. You hire me. What am I doing? I'm doing it because I want a profit. But we're also doing what? We're making it more complex, more roundabout. So we're not just making it complex for complexity's sake, and that there's no one part of the economy that's more risky than another part in particular. I mean, you can't look at it and go, aha, that part's riskier, right? Maybe per industry you can say, well, this is a riskier industry. than others. But still, if we're looking at markets, they tend to go to one price. They tend to conform to one level of risk, right? And that's what the capital asset pricing model tells us, right? The security market line tells us that the risk then is distributed throughout the whole structure production approximately evenly, right? So I'm not afraid of that risk interfering with that at all. In fact, this actually dovetails very nicely with finance and these other sorts of things, entrepreneurship.
It seems like I've heard some behavioral economists who do little experiments, and they say that, well, if I offer you $10 today or $11 next month, and then they say, well, they took the 10 today, and that shows that they're not being rational. And I'm always, I know, but but it seems like there's the risk component is highly important when you talk about any kind of investment, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So when we're looking at the market rate of interest, right? The market rate of interest is different than the originary rate. In other words, at its core, at its basis, what is the fundamental component for the formation of interest rates? Answer, time preference. Can other things influence what we see in the market? And the answer is yes, obviously yes. For example, inflation, right? And so we change real interest rates to nominal interest rates. Default risk can change our way that we are looking at interest rates, right? And so there's lots of other things that can impact that. And so now we say, all right, what about our liquidity preference, right? In other words, what is our view of the future? Well, this is von Bauwerk's second objection, or second condition of time preference, right? Remember, he had three points there. His second one was my inability to witness the future, or my unwillingness to project that far out, or maybe I'm just scared of what's around the corner, right? That's basically a liquidity preference argument. So yeah, the Austrians have incorporated those other features all the way back to the 1890s and 1880s, actually. So we have a very long tradition about these sorts of things being incorporated. So yeah, we talk about that. There's a quick overview here, right? Did it in 45 minutes.
It's good. Yeah, I think that's one part that, I mean, the first time I heard somebody talking about that, it just kind of blew my mind that somebody who's got a PhD in economics and says, well, this is proving that people aren't acting rationally, and I'm like, what? How did?
No. But remember how Austrians think of rationality, and not just Austrians, but is a person engaging in a rain dance acting rationally? Right. That's the question. So, is that person doing it? And the only way that we can judge whether or not that person is acting rationally is if we ask him, why is he doing the rain dance, right? He says, I'm doing the rain dance because I believe it will cause it to rain. If he truly believes that his rain dance will cause it to rain, then yes, he's acting rationally. Whether or not it actually makes it rain is a completely separate issue, right? It is, our definition of rationality is, you have goals, or ends, and you have means. Do the means I employ take me, in my belief, do I believe the means that I employ take me to the ends I seek? If they do, if I believe it, then I'm acting rationally. That's it, full stop, no more. Okay. All right, well, it's 1:45. I shall thank you for coming and being here. I don't know when our next meeting is. When's our next meeting?
Should be in 2 weeks, but Roy and I haven't decided on the time
Okay,
yet.
let's not meet in 2 weeks because I will be in Atlanta.
Oh, really?
Really? I will be going blah, 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 blah in Atlanta.
You might just
Excellent.
have to come join me then.
But if you choose not, you can have it in 2 weeks, but if you choose not to do it in 2 weeks, we could do business cycle. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'll talk to
And by
Roy.
you, I mean you guys.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
I know, but you needed capital theory first,
That is very true.
and now you know why. All right, well, thanks, guys. I will see you next time unless I'm in Atlanta.
Thank you, Doc.
I'm gonna go stab some people. Fencing.
Before anybody leaves, make sure to sign up on the sign-up sheet on the way out. I just need everybody's name and email.
Are you sending a pen around?
Or
What was
else.
Are you sending a pen around?